Hi, it's Mickey. Today we're going to be talking about how to be a good Kantian. So let's just remind ourselves the context here. Kant gives Tria the really important argument that intent is what matters to ethics, and so this makes him an absolutist about deontology, but much more specifically, it is the maxim that is being willed. So remember, Kant's maxims are the subjective principles of action that we're used to calling rules when x, I will y. Um, those are subjective. What would be objective? That's what Kant calls the moral law or the categorical imperative. Remember, this can't have content because it must apply and be binding at all times, in all situations, on all people, and as soon as you start adding content, you remove the ability to do so. So instead, what we actually need to do is to test, and think of it as a test, whether our own individual maxim is consistent with the moral law or the categorical imperative. So to do so, Kant gives us what are called formulations. Think of it as a formula. You plug in your maxim and run it through the formula, and it spits out permissible or impermissible. So uh, that's what we're going to be doing. And when we're doing this, reminder practice is key. So I strongly encourage you, either as a discussion response or to post in the discussion forums, some examples of these. And so we're going to do the two formulations for which you'll be responsible on the exam, the formulation of universal law and the formulation of humanity. Now, so let's just start with the formulation of universal law. I would get it out of the book and look at it. Kant puts it in italics for you. But for now, it says uh, a good way to define the formulation of universal law is to act so as it is possible to will that all people act that way. That is, only uphold the maxims that it's possible that everybody upholds. Now, that's the general idea. Let me say two things about that, making it more precise. First of all, why do we focus on possibility and impossibility? Because the moral law has to be independent of content and situation. That is, it has to be a priori. And interestingly enough, the only things we know can be false a priori, without knowing anything about the world, are things that are impossible. So, since you've never met my wife, you don't know whether it's true that she's over 5'6" or true that she's under 5'6", but you certainly know without ever having met her that she's not both over and under 5'6". And so the impossible contradictions are the kind of things we know are false a priori. And so those are going to play a very important role in using the formulation of universal law. But notice how this gets at the universality of the moral law by just saying, is this the kind of thing that everyone could act on? So it's going to be a little tricky. Let me give one more piece of background apparatus before we're going to go step by step. It will have 4 steps. This is what we're looking for is a thing called a contradiction. Now, we throw that word around all the time, but realize that a contradiction is something that is precise, and we need to be aware of this because contradictions are the kind of things that are impossible to exist. So a contradiction is only of the form A and not A. And so something can't be both a dog and a non-dog at the same time. That would be a contradiction. So be aware of that form. Once we have that, I'm going to give you the following 4 steps. I suggest you write them down. The 4 steps for applying FUL. Step 1, identify your maxim. Just identify whatever maxim you intend to be testing. And we'll go through some examples in a second. Step 2, universalize the maxim. That is, make it apply to everyone. Step 3, ask if you would be willing a contradiction in in the universalization of that maxim. Step 4 is evaluation. If you would be willing a contradiction, the maxim is impermissible because it can't apply in all times, in all places, in all peoples. And if there is no contradiction, then it is permissible because it is the kind of thing that can apply in all times, in all places, in all peoples. So those are the 4 steps. Identify your maxim, universalize the maxim, consider whether the universalization of that maxim would be a contradiction of your will, and lastly, your evaluation, if there is a contradiction, impermissible, if there's not, permissible. So, let us give some specific examples. I always like to start with the following example. Plagiarism. So, plagiarism is an action, which means there should be a maxim associated with it. Remember, the maxim is the form when X, I will Y. Making it simple, we might say that when I want the credit without the work, I will plagiarize. That's your maxim. When I want the credit without the work, I will plagiarize. What does it mean to universalize that? Well, that is to turn it into a law for Kant. Remember, laws are universal and carry necessity. So that would mean to instead consider the maxim when anyone in any situation ever wants the credit without doing the work, they must plagiarize as a law. That is, as certainly as 2 plus 2 is 4, they must plagiarize. And that's important, as we'll see, it kind of weeds out some side effect stuff. And so step 3, we consider whether we can consistently will that law. And step 3 is the tricky step, so we're going to spend a while on it. So, first of all, remember Mill. Mill's concern was that Kant, in stating this formulation, doesn't get away from consequences. But Mill's somewhat misreading step 3. So, step 3 is not, what are the consequences of that being universal? Step 3 is asking, is it possible for you to want that universal? So those are 2 slightly different questions. One's asking about consequences, one's asking about possibility. So to see that those are different, here's 2 questions. Are they the same or different? Is it possible to fit 50 people in this room? Versus, what are the consequences of fitting 50 people in this room? Those are different. And so, yes, we need to talk about the consequences of this maxim, but only in terms of, are the consequences the kind of thing I can consistently will? So think of step 3 as saying, are you really thinking through what it would mean to will? That as a universal maxim. So let's think through what it would mean to universalize as a law the maxim that when anyone wants the work, when anyone wants the credit without the work, they will plagiarize. So first of all, notice that if this is a law, that is as certain as 2 plus 2 is 4, you can get rid of a lot of stuff that might screw up the tests otherwise. For instance, could a school punish you for plagiarism? No, they can't punish you for 2 plus 2 being 4. So as a law part of it gets rid of a lot of these kind of contingent consequences. But Kant says, think of what you would be willing. Would there be more plagiarism, less plagiarism, or the same amount of plagiarism? There'd be more, there'd be a ton more. Because everybody very often finds themselves in situations where they want the credit, but they don't want to do the work. We find that all the time. But if this maxim were a universal law, as soon as we found ourselves in that situation, we would have to plagiarize. So let's think through of what that would mean. Well, here's what we mean by a contradiction. Among other things, plagiarism would be absolutely rampant in universities, which means, would your degree be worth something or nothing? It would be worth toilet paper. If plagiarism was this rampant, your degree wouldn't mean anything. But notice, there's the contradiction. Because why did I want to plagiarize in the first place? To get the credit. But if my degree doesn't mean anything, I'm not getting the credit. So there is a contradiction in the will. That is, I am willing at the same time both that I get credit and that I don't get credit for my actions. So that's what we mean by a contradiction. Now, what does that mean? All that means is, well, we're not talking about consequences. We're talking about thinking through what you would be willing. And if I think through what I would be willing, as it turns out, if I was willing that maxim apply universally, then I am willing a contradiction. I am willing both that I get the credit and don't get the credit at the same time, but a contradiction is impossible, and so it is impossible for me to will that as a universal law, which means it cannot be consistent with the categorical imperative. Hence, since I found a contradiction in step 3, then it is impermissible. So that's a more extended example. Overall, what FUL is really good for, it's an exception detector. So anytime I want to do something, but I don't want everybody to do it, it's going to fail FUL, guarantee it. So think of theft. Well, when I want something without paying for it, I will steal. Maxim. Universalize it. When anybody wants something without paying for it, they must steal as a law. Think that through. Lots and lots and lots and lots more theft because everybody wants stuff and nobody wants to pay for it. And there's the contradiction in the will because I would be both willing that I have more stuff and less stuff at the same time because everybody would be stealing from me. Hence, it is impossible for that to be universal. I'm trying to treat myself as an exception, which means it's going to fail FUL. So that is definitely fast, and I expect you to work on this some, of course. Do your work outside of class. So make sure you're writing your own examples and working through it. What does one look like that passes FUL? This is the last one I'll do. Well, think of my maxim for eating a sandwich. If we remember our lessons from rule utilitarianism and how to word maxims, it would be something like, when I want a sandwich and I have the ingredients available, I'll make a sandwich. Universalize that. When anybody has the ingredients available and wants a sandwich, they will make a sandwich. What happens? Nothing. That's actually the world we live in, which means there's an easy way to know that it's possible because what's actual must be possible. So there's nothing impossible about that situation because that's the situation we exist in. And so there's no clear contradiction there, and we can kind of prove that by the fact that that's just the world we live in, so we know it's permissible. On step 3, don't fudge things. First of all, don't just say there's a contradiction and leave it at that without actually stating something in the form A and not A. But second of all, don't try to see contradictions when they're not there. So people try to cheat on FUL sometimes. Don't do that. See what the formulation gives as an answer. Don't start with your answer and work backwards. All right, so practice FUL, post some FUL examples on the discussion board so other people can see your work. Be very helpful. Next one, FH. So that stands for the Formulation of Humanity. The Formulation of Humanity, we could reword it says, uphold only the maxims that treat humans as an end and never as a mere means. So again, FH, act only on the maxims that treat humans as an end, never as a mere means. So first of all, let's be sure of the means-ends distinction. The end is where you actually see value. The means is how I obtain it. So here's an example I would do normally if we were in class. I'd ask, does anybody want any really hideous, disgusting-looking artwork that's covered with bacteria? And, of course, no one raises their hand, and I'll hold up, $100 and $20 bills and say, are you sure? Because the actual currency, those green, hideous, we have the ugliest money in the world things, have no value as a means. But why do people go so far as to kill others for it? Because it's not the money, it's what you can do with the money that has value. So no, I don't want ugly artwork for its own sake. I see value in what I can get out of it as an end. So my bacon-filled hot tub. So means is an end. Second thing, though, careful. The Formulation of Humanity says that we can't use humans as a mere means. Remember, mere is logically important. Mere means only. So, what does that mean? First of all, realize you use humans as a means all the time. You are using me as a means right now to further your education. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with using humans as a means, only as a mere means. Now, so at all times, we must realize that humans are moral agents, are the kinds of things that have moral worth, and must act accordingly. We can't treat them as machines or tools or objects. Before I give the steps for FH, though, it's important to realize, well, why think this gets at the categorical imperative? Why think that this is the kind of thing that is a different way of saying the same thing as FUL, for instance? Those sound really different. Remember last lecture. What is the one and only thing that is good regardless of circumstances? The goodwill. That is the unqualified good. But wait a minute. What is the one and only thing that can possess the goodwill? Humans. And so the Kantian notion of human and the value of humans has nothing to do with biology. It's the fact that these are the kind of things that could possess the goodwill, and as such, they must always be respected as the potential holders of the one thing that has unqualified value. So that's why you might think FH is expressing the same thing as FUL. So FH is a little easier. Now you might say, well, why does Kant give two tests when one's easier and one's harder? Because given the situation, one might be a lot easier using the other. But theoretically, they should always get the same answer. So FH has 3 steps. Step 1, same as before, identify your maxim. However, we don't need to universalize it. Instead, we just say, are any humans being used as a mere means in step 2? And then step 3 is evaluate if a human is used as a mere means, impermissible. If they're not, permissible. So a good way to do step 2 is just to think about the humans involved. So let's work backwards from the examples I gave for FUL. Making a sandwich. When I want a sandwich and have all the ingredients, I will make a sandwich. Well, which humans are involved there? Oh, this guy. Notice that's why I said you are always, it's okay to use humans as means, because you're always using yourself as a means for any action. The only question is, am I using myself as a mere means? So what I might ask there is anything about preparing a sandwich impeding my moral abilities, my ability to do the right thing as a moral agent? No. In fact, it does the opposite, because it nourishes me. And so no human is used as a mere means. So what kinds of things use humans as a mere means? Kant says lying. Why? Remember, humans are the one kind of thing that can perform moral actions. And if you lie to me, that means I might be acting based on false information and act wrongly. And so by your lying to me, it undercuts my ability to be a moral agent, to do the right thing. And so lying for Kant is always treating humans as a mere means. You're not respecting their ability to make their own choices. So, go back to the plagiarism case. Notice that when you're plagiarizing, so the maxim, when I want the credit without the work, I will plagiarize. What humans are involved? Me, you, and the person you are plagiarizing. So, first of all, it's going to be impermissible because you're lying to me, Mickey, when you submit your plagiarized work. And that means you are not respecting my ability to do the right thing. In that case, failure. And so you're treating me as a mere means to your grade. However, stealing is also using someone as a mere means because you're basically treating them as an ATM machine. And so you're also treating as a mere means whoever's work you plagiarized. Very similarly then, the theft case, when I want something without paying for it, I will steal it. you're treating a human as an ATM machine, as a mere means, but more generally, if you take my stuff, you have taken my ability to do the right or wrong thing with the money on my own, so you have impeded my moral agency. So, FH, we always look for, are you treating humans as a mere means? We talked about some of the obvious cases, but just remember, you use humans as means all the time. What we have to do is ask if your actions are such that they're somehow impeding my moral agency. The opposite of using human as a mere means, if this will help you, is what he refers to as respect. Are you respecting all humans, by which he means respecting them as moral agents? So an easy way to think of this, think of how you treat a server at a restaurant. So of course you're using them as a means, but the question is, do you see them as a human? As something that has this intrinsic value and ability to do right? That is, are you polite to them, etc.? Or do you just see them as a mere means of getting the food to your table? I have dined with people who are the latter, and I hate it and it drives me crazy. You probably know some people like that. So think of those cases as examples of using humans as a mere means versus respecting humans. Again, strongly encourage you to do some of your own examples, post them online. We will see you next time.